My name is Madison Reed. And the last thing my brother said before the police shoved me into the back of a squad car was, "You're not my family anymore." Welcome back to Revenge Story HQ, where family betrayal, manipulation, shocking secrets, and emotional revenge stories come to life. If you enjoy dramatic twists, toxic family drama, and satisfying revenge stories, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment below where you're watching from. Now, let me take you back to the night my brother chose my stepmother over me while I was being arrested, completely unaware she was hiding a secret that would destroy our entire family. I can still hear his voice. Cold, flat, like the sister who helped raise him had suddenly become a stranger. Meanwhile, Vanessa stood behind him in the doorway of my father's house pretending to cry into a silk handkerchief, while a tiny smile pulled at the corner of her mouth. That was the moment I realized she had won. At least temporarily. Because 3 months earlier, we had no idea who she really was. My name is Madison Reed. And the last thing my brother said before the police shoved me into the back of a squad car was, "You're not my family anymore." I can still hear his voice. Cold, flat, like the sister who helped raise him had suddenly become a stranger. Meanwhile, Vanessa stood behind him in the doorway of my father's house pretending to cry into a silk handkerchief, while a tiny smile pulled at the corner of her mouth. That was the moment I realized she had won. At least temporarily. Because 3 months earlier, we had no idea who she really was. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off every house on our street. Neighbors stood outside pretending not to stare. Mrs. Patterson from across the road actually had her phone out recording. I stood barefoot on my father's front lawn in gray sweatpants and one of Ethan's old college hoodies while a police officer tightened handcuffs around my wrists. "You have the right to remain silent." "This is insane," I whispered. My voice barely worked. Another officer was searching my car parked near the curb. My father stood near the front door looking pale and hollow, like he'd aged 10 years in one night. But he wouldn't look at me. Not once. And Ethan, God. Ethan looked at me like I disgusted him. Like I was dangerous. Vanessa clung to his arm dramatically, mascara perfectly smeared beneath glossy eyes. "I didn't want this," she cried softly. I told them maybe there was another explanation. Liar. Every instinct in my body screamed she was enjoying this. The officer near my car suddenly yelled, "Found something." My stomach dropped. He walked toward us holding a velvet jewelry box. Vanessa gasped theatrically beside Ethan. "Oh my God." The officer opened it. Diamond earrings. A ruby bracelet. A gold necklace. All pieces Vanessa had reported stolen earlier that evening. Found inside my trunk. I stared at the jewelry like my brain refused to process reality. "No. Y whispered. No, no, no. Those aren't mine." The officer's expression hardened. "Miss Reed, these items were recovered from your vehicle. They were planted there." Even to my own ears, I sounded desperate. Crazy. Exactly how Vanessa wanted me to sound. Dad finally spoke. His voice broke when he said my name. "Madison, tell me the truth." The disappointment in his eyes hurt more than the handcuffs. "I am telling the truth." Vanessa buried her face into Ethan's chest. "I knew she hated me," she sobbed. "But I never thought she'd go this far." Ethan wrapped his arm protectively around her. Then he looked directly at me. And shattered my entire world. "You need help," he said quietly. I stared at him in disbelief. "Ethan, she's been jealous ever since Dad proposed." "That's not true." "Stop lying." The sudden anger in his voice stunned everyone. Even the officers paused. Ethan stepped toward me, eyes blazing. "You terrorized Vanessa for months." "I was trying to protect you." "From what?" "From her." Vanessa started crying harder. Dad closed his eyes like he physically couldn't handle hearing this anymore. That's when the officer grabbed my arm. "You'll have a chance to explain downtown." As they walked me toward the squad car, I looked back one final time. Dad looked broken. Ethan looked furious. But Vanessa looked victorious. And just before the police car door closed, She smiled at me. Tiny.
Quick.
Almost invisible.
But I saw it.
That smile told me everything. This wasn't random. This wasn't misunderstanding. Vanessa had planned every second of this. And somehow, my own family helped her destroy me. 3 months earlier, before the arrest, before the lies, before Ethan stopped loving me, we were still a family, and if I had known what was coming, I would have never let her through our front door. Before Vanessa, it was always me and Ethan. Always. Our parents divorced when I was 13 and Ethan was 10. Dad moved into a townhouse across the city, while Mom kept the family home in Seattle. The divorce destroyed both of them emotionally. But for Ethan, it destroyed his sense of safety. I still remember the first night after Dad moved out. Ethan crawled into my bedroom at around 2 in the morning carrying his blanket. "I can't sleep," he whispered. His little voice cracked when he said it. So I scooted over and let him sleep beside me. That became our thing after the divorce. Whenever life got scary, we found each other. Friday nights became sacred.
Pizza.
Movies. Blanket forts when we were younger. Horror marathons when we got older. Even after high school. Even after college. Nothing interrupted Friday nights. Not relationships. Not work. Not friends. It was our tradition. Our constant. Sometimes Ethan would call me at midnight just to say, "You awake, Maddie?" And I'd laugh because he already knew the answer. Always. That word became ours. Always. We survived everything together. When Ethan got bullied freshman year for being skinny and quiet, I marched into school and publicly humiliated one of the boys tormenting him. I got suspended for 2 days. Worth it. When my college boyfriend cheated on me, Ethan drove 3 hours in the rain just to sit on my apartment floor, eating takeout with me. When Mom got diagnosed with breast cancer, we practically became each other's oxygen.
Especially after she passed.
That loss changed us permanently. Dad buried himself in work, but Ethan and I, we held each other together. After Mom's funeral, Ethan sat beside me on the back porch wrapped in one of Dad's old jackets. "We still have each other," he whispered. I cried so hard I couldn't breathe, and he just held me there. That was Ethan. Protective, loyal, soft-hearted. The kind of man who cried during dog movies but would absolutely throw punches for people he loved. Which is why what happened later destroyed me so badly. Because losing Ethan didn't feel like losing a sibling. It felt like losing half my history. Half my identity. For years it stayed that way. Just us. Until Dad met Vanessa. And suddenly, everything started changing.
Fast.
The first time I heard her name was during one of our Friday movie nights. Ethan paused the TV halfway through some terrible action movie and grinned. "So, Dad met someone." I nearly choked on popcorn.
What?
"He's been seeing her for like 2 months, apparently." 2 months. Yeah. Ethan laughed. "Apparently she's gorgeous." I rolled my eyes. Dad's 52. Gorgeous should not be his main criteria anymore. Ethan threw popcorn at me. "I'm serious." He sounds happy. And honestly, that mattered to me. Dad had been lonely for years after Mom died. He stopped dating completely. Stopped traveling. Stopped smiling much at all. If someone finally made him happy,
I wanted to support that.
I just didn't realize happiness can sometimes arrive disguised as a predator. 2 weeks later, I met Vanessa Whitmore for the first time, and I understood immediately why Dad fell for her. She was stunning, not just physically.
Strategically.
Vanessa knew exactly how to make people feel important. She greeted me like we were old friends. "Madison," she said warmly, "your father talks about you constantly." Her voice was smooth and calm, expensive somehow. She hugged Ethan first, touched Dad's arm while speaking, maintained eye contact perfectly. Everything about her felt practiced, but not enough to trigger alarm bells immediately. She brought homemade cheesecake, remembered everyone's coffee order after hearing it once, laughed at Dad's stories like he was the most fascinating man alive. And Ethan liked her instantly. Of course he did. Vanessa was designed to be liked. At dinner, she somehow guided every conversation without appearing controlling. That was the strange part. She never interrupted directly. She redirected, manipulated flow, like a chess player moving pieces quietly. Dad looked happier than I'd seen him in years. Ethan kept smiling at me across the table like,
See?
she's great. And honestly, part of me agreed. Until one tiny moment changed everything. Dad started telling an old embarrassing story about Ethan accidentally setting the microwave on fire as a kid. We all laughed. But Ethan started laughing too loudly, snorting a little like he always did when something genuinely hit him. Vanessa touched his wrist gently. Not aggressive. Not obvious. Just subtle enough. Careful, she teased softly. You're getting loud. Ethan instantly quieted. Immediately, like someone flipped a switch. The table went weirdly silent for a second. Then Vanessa smiled brightly and changed the subject. Nobody reacted.
Except me.
Because Ethan never got embarrassed around family. Ever. Later that night, after dinner ended, I walked into the kitchen and found Vanessa alone rinsing wine glasses. She smiled without turning around. Your brother adores you. Something about the way she said it made my stomach tighten. We're close, I answered carefully. That's rare. She dried a glass slowly. Sometimes unhealthy boundaries form after family trauma. I blinked. What? She smiled again. Still gentle. Still polished. Nothing bad. Just an observation. Then she walked past me before I could respond, leaving me standing there confused, uneasy, and for the first time, afraid of something I couldn't explain yet. After that dinner, Vanessa became impossible to escape. Suddenly she was everywhere. Dad talked about her constantly. Ethan defended her before anyone even criticized her. And somehow, within weeks, she had inserted herself into every part of our family dynamic. At first it looked harmless, helpful even. Vanessa reorganized Dad's house, started planning family dinners, bought Ethan expensive birthday gifts, sent me thoughtful texts. She even remembered the anniversary of Mom's death and delivered flowers to both me and Ethan separately. That hit hard emotionally. Too hard, because it felt genuine. And that's what made Vanessa dangerous. She never acted evil. She acted caring in ways that made you question your instincts. Whenever I felt suspicious, she'd immediately do something thoughtful enough to make me feel guilty for doubting her. That's how people like her survive. Not through force, through confusion. One Friday night, Ethan canceled movie night for the first time in 12 years. Vanessa got tickets to some charity gala thing, he explained over the phone. You hate galas. I know, but she really wants me there. I tried laughing it off.
Okay, wow.
You're whipped already. Silence. Then, she's trying to help me grow up a little, Maddie. That annoyed me instantly. What's that supposed to mean? You know, he hesitated. Be more polished. Professional. I actually laughed. Since when do you care about being polished? Another silence. Longer this time. Then Ethan sighed. Vanessa says successful men present themselves differently. There it was again. That weird correction thing. Tiny, subtle, but constant. And slowly, Ethan started changing. He dressed differently, talked differently. Even his posture changed around her. The worst part? He didn't notice. None of us did fully. Because manipulation never starts with obvious control. It starts with tiny edits to someone's identity, one piece at a time. A month later, Dad invited us to dinner at a private country club Vanessa apparently belonged to. The place screamed wealth. Dark wood interiors. Champagne glasses. People who smiled without showing teeth. Vanessa fit there perfectly. Halfway through dinner, Ethan started telling one of our childhood stories. The story about me accidentally cutting my own bangs at age 9 and blaming him. Dad laughed so hard, he nearly spilled wine. But before Ethan could finish, Vanessa touched his shoulder. Sweetheart, she interrupted softly. Maybe don't tell stories that make Madison sound childish in front of everyone. The table went awkwardly quiet. Ethan blinked.
Oh.
Right. And just like that, the energy died. Vanessa smiled sympathetically at me like she had defended my honor. But she hadn't. She controlled the emotional direction of the room. Again. Later that evening, I noticed something else. Every single time Ethan and I drifted into private conversation, Vanessa appeared. Instantly. Like she was monitoring distance. At one point, Ethan followed me onto the balcony, while I grabbed air after dinner. For about 30 seconds. It felt normal again. Just us. You okay? He asked quietly. I don't know, I admitted. He frowned slightly. Before he could ask what I meant, the balcony door slid open. Vanessa stepped outside smiling. There you two are. Not angry. Not suspicious. Just present. Always present. I was wondering where my favorite people disappeared to. Ethan immediately stepped back toward her. And something inside me twisted painfully. Because, for the first time in my life, being alone with my own brother suddenly felt impossible. Then came the lake house conversation. And that's when I realized Vanessa wasn't just changing family dynamics. She was restructuring power. Dad casually announced it during Sunday dinner. Vanessa thinks it's time we sell the cabin. I froze. So suddenly, Dad shrugged. We barely use it. That's not true, I said immediately. We spend Christmas there every year. Vanessa sipped wine calmly. It's also expensive to maintain, she added gently. And emotionally, sometimes holding on to the past prevents healing. That cabin belonged to Mom's side of the family. It held every childhood memory we had left. Ethan used to fish off the dock with me every summer. Mom taught us card games by the fireplace there. That place was our family history. Dad looked uncomfortable. Vanessa's just saying maybe it's time for a fresh chapter. Fresh chapter. That phrase echoed in my head all night. Because suddenly I understood something terrifying. Vanessa wasn't joining our family. She was replacing it. And somehow, Dad and Ethan were helping her do it. 3 days later, Dad announced their engagement. And Ethan looked happier about it than anyone else in the room. While Vanessa smiled at me from across the dinner table like she'd already won. And maybe she had. At least at that point. Because I still didn't understand how dangerous she really was.
Not yet.
But I was about to find out. After the engagement, everything accelerated. Like Vanessa no longer needed to hide the process. Dad stopped answering my calls regularly. Ethan became harder to reach. Family dinners turned into carefully controlled performances where Vanessa somehow dominated every emotional interaction without ever raising her voice. And the strangest part? If you tried explaining it to someone else, you sounded paranoid. Because technically, she wasn't doing anything openly wrong. That's what made it so maddening. The manipulation lived in small moments. Tiny emotional cuts. Easy to dismiss individually. Impossible to ignore collectively. Friday movie nights disappeared completely. At first, Ethan had excuses. Wedding planning. Work stress. Dinner with Vanessa's friends. Then, eventually, he stopped explaining altogether. One Friday around midnight, I texted him. You awake? For the first time in over a decade, he never replied. I stared at my phone for hours that night, and I hated how much it hurt. A week later, I stopped by Dad's house unexpectedly. Vanessa answered the door, wearing one of Dad's expensive dress shirts like she already owned the place. Oh, she said pleasantly. Madison. We weren't expecting you. I was nearby.
Lie.
I came because Ethan hadn't answered me in 6 days. Vanessa opened the door wider, but didn't move aside immediately. Tiny pause. Tiny control move. Then she smiled.
Come in.
Dad sat in the living room watching television. Except he barely looked up when I entered. That alone felt wrong. Dad always hugged me first. Always.
I se'n va el que d'uns tairs moments la té.
And my stomach dropped. He looked exhausted. Like genuinely exhausted. dark circles under his eyes, jaw constantly tense. But the second Vanessa touched his arm, he smiled automatically. It looked rehearsed. We sat awkwardly in the kitchen while Vanessa made coffee. She controlled the entire conversation effortlessly. Whenever Ethan started talking too freely, she redirected. Whenever Dad expressed nostalgia, she reframed it. At one point, Dad mentioned missing our old Christmas cabin traditions. Vanessa laughed lightly. "Oh, Daniel, your children are adults now. Families evolve." Ethan nodded immediately. "Yeah, maybe we've all been holding on to old traditions too hard." I stared at him in disbelief. This was the same man who once drove through a snowstorm because he refused to miss cabin Christmas. Vanessa caught me looking and smiled. Not warmly, knowingly. Then came the humiliation dinner. The moment I finally realized Vanessa viewed our family bond as competition. Dad invited several business associates over one evening. The entire dinner felt staged. Perfect candles, perfect wine pairings, perfect fake smiles. Ethan loosened up halfway through and started laughing loudly during a story. For one brief second, he sounded like himself again. Then Vanessa touched his hand. "Baby," she said softly, smiling sweetly. "Successful men don't dominate conversations." Silence. Ethan immediately sat back quietly. One of Dad's business friends awkwardly sipped wine, and I felt rage crawl up my throat. Because Vanessa didn't just correct behavior. She trained people publicly, like obedience exercises disguised as sophistication. Later that night, I confronted Ethan privately in the hallway. "What's happening to you?" His expression hardened instantly. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You don't act like yourself anymore." "That's because I'm growing up." "No," I said quietly. "You're disappearing." His jaw tightened. "You've hated Vanessa from the beginning." "That's not true. She makes Dad happy." "At what cost?" That hit a nerve. I saw anger flash across his face immediately.
"You always do this," he snapped.
"You make everything emotional and dramatic." I stared at him, because those words, they didn't sound like Ethan. They sounded like Vanessa. And deep down, I think he realized it too, because guilt flickered across his face for just a second, before Vanessa suddenly appeared at the end of the hallway, watching us,
smiling faintly.
Like she'd been listening the entire time. And honestly, she probably had been. The moment Dad said the words, "We need to discuss the estate," I knew Vanessa had finally made her real move. The dining room looked beautiful that night. Too beautiful. Candles flickered against crystal glasses. Soft jazz played through hidden speakers. Vanessa wore a cream-colored dress that somehow made her look innocent and expensive at the same time. Everything about the evening felt carefully designed, like a performance. And somehow, that made me more nervous than if she'd just acted openly hostile. Dad cleared his throat awkwardly while cutting into a steak. "So, Vanessa and I met with a financial planner this week." Ethan smiled immediately. "That's smart." Vanessa reached over and squeezed Dad's hand affectionately. "We just want to make sure everyone's protected." There it was again. That language. Protected. Secure. Healthy. She wrapped control inside comforting words so perfectly that questioning her made you sound unreasonable. Dad shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "If something ever happened to me," he began carefully, "I want Vanessa taken care of first." A cold feeling slid into my stomach. "What does that mean exactly?" Vanessa answered before Dad could. "Oh, nothing dramatic," she laughed lightly. "Daniel simply wants marital assets structured responsibly." Marital assets. The way she spoke about family emotionally disconnected everything. Like, we weren't people. We were accounts. Percentages. Property. Dad avoided my eyes. The house, investment accounts, life insurance. Every sentence felt heavier. Ethan nodded slowly, like all of this made perfect sense. I stared at him.
"Wait.
So, everything goes to Vanessa?" "That's not what Dad said," Ethan replied quickly. Dad rubbed his forehead. You and Ethan would still inherit eventually. Eventually. After Vanessa. If Vanessa decided to be fair. And suddenly I understood exactly why she pushed for the wedding so quickly. It was never about love. It was infrastructure.
Power.
Legal control. Vanessa tilted her head sympathetically toward me. Madison, I know these conversations can feel emotional after losing your mother. I almost laughed at the manipulation. She invoked Mom constantly whenever she needed emotional leverage. But this is simply what healthy adult planning looks like.
Healthy.
Again, everything she did became healthy. Anyone resisting her suddenly looked unstable, immature, emotional. Dad looked exhausted already, like he'd been rehearsed through this conversation beforehand. I leaned forward carefully. Dad, are you comfortable with all this? Vanessa's eyes flicked toward me instantly. Tiny movement.
But sharp.
Dad hesitated too long, and that hesitation terrified me. Ethan noticed too. I saw confusion flicker across his face briefly, before Vanessa touched his knee beneath the table. Then he hardened again. Why are you interrogating him? Ethan snapped. I'm asking questions. You're making this ugly. No, I said quietly. I think it already became ugly. Silence swallowed the room. Vanessa lowered her gaze like I deeply wounded her. I understand Madison may feel threatened. Threatened? I repeated incredulously. Yes. Vanessa sighed softly. Blended families are difficult sometimes. The rage that hit me then was almost physical, because she said it so calmly.
So gently.
Like SHE was the victim. Dad immediately stepped in. Madison, enough. That hurt more than anything, because Dad never used to shut me down like that. Never. Vanessa had changed the emotional gravity of the entire family, and everyone was orbiting around her now. Even Ethan. Dinner ended shortly afterward. Tense.
Cold.
Artificial. As I grabbed my coat near the front door, Ethan followed me outside. Rain fell softly across the driveway. For a second, he looked like my brother again. Conflicted.
Uneasy.
Maybe you pushed too hard in there, he muttered. I stared at him. You seriously think this is normal? She's marrying Dad, Maddie. She's taking control of his entire life. Ethan exhaled sharply. You always assume the worst about her. No, I said quietly. I think you refuse to see it. His jaw tightened instantly. And just like that, the wall came back up again. She makes him happy. You keep saying that like happiness excuses manipulation. Ethan looked away. And that silence told me something terrifying. Deep down, part of him already knew. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every instinct screamed the same thing. Something was horribly wrong. At 2:17 a.m., I hired a private investigator. And that decision changed everything. Her name was Vanessa Whitmore. Except, it wasn't. That was the first thing the investigator discovered. 3 days after hiring him, I sat inside a small downtown coffee shop while he slid a thin folder across the table. Your stepmother's complicated, he said carefully. The folder suddenly felt heavy in my hands. How complicated? He hesitated. That depends how deep you want to go. My stomach tightened. Tell me everything. The investigator's name was Mark Delaney. Former insurance fraud investigator. Mid-50s. Quiet voice. Sharp eyes. The kind of man who noticed details other people missed. And even he looked unsettled discussing Vanessa. Vanessa Whitmore legally changed her name 8 years ago, he explained. My pulse quickened. What was it before? Natalie Voss. I blinked. That's not illegal, though. No, Mark agreed. But patterns matter. He opened another file. She's also been married twice before your father. That froze me instantly. Dad told us she'd only been engaged once years ago. She lied. She omitted. The distinction made my skin crawl. Mark continued calmly. Both husbands were significantly older. Both wealthy. I felt cold suddenly. What happened to them? The first husband died from a heart attack. And the second? Mark paused. Prescription overdose. A chill ran down my spine. Was it investigated? No evidence of foul play. No evidence. Not innocence. Not proof. Just absence. That wording mattered. Mark slid several printed photos toward me. Vanessa, with different men. Different hair colors. Different cities. Different names. But always the same smile. Controlled.
Polished. Perfect.
She tends to integrate herself quickly into financially stable families, Mark explained. Then what? She restructures relationships. That sentence hit me hard, because that's exactly what she'd done to us. She isolates emotionally influential family members first, he continued. Usually adult children. My mouth went dry. Ethan? Mark nodded slowly. She removes resistance before securing legal or financial protection. I suddenly remembered the inheritance dinner, the cabin sale, the emotional distancing, the corrections, the isolation. None of it was random. It was strategy. My hands shook slightly, flipping through the paperwork. There's more, Mark said quietly. Of course there was. There always is. He handed me another document. 3 different addresses. 3 different last names. And multiple lawsuits. Small ones mostly. Financial disputes. Asset disagreements. Suddenly Vanessa's entire personality made sense. She wasn't emotionally sophisticated. She was professionally manipulative. Did the previous families suspect her? I asked softly. Mark leaned back. One did. My heart pounded harder. What happened? The daughter accused Vanessa of emotional abuse and financial coercion shortly before her father died. I stopped breathing for a second. What happened to her? She became estranged from the family afterward. Of course she did. Because that's what Vanessa did. She isolated threats, destroyed credibility, rewrote narratives, exactly like she was doing to me now. Mark lowered his voice slightly. There's one more thing. I looked up slowly. The overdose husband changed his will 3 months before his death. Cold fear crawled down my spine. To Vanessa? Mark nodded. How much? Everything. Silence swallowed the table. Outside the coffee shop window, people walked normally through the city like the world still made sense. Meanwhile, my entire reality was collapsing. Can you prove any crimes? I asked finally. Mark sighed. That's the problem.
No proof.
Only patterns. Manipulation. Dead husbands. Destroyed families.
And now?
My father. I drove home shaking. Every instinct screamed the same thing. Vanessa wasn't just toxic. She was dangerous. And suddenly, I understood something even worse. If I confronted Dad without undeniable evidence, Vanessa would turn him against me completely. But if I stayed silent, I might lose him forever anyway. That night Ethan called unexpectedly. For one brief second, hope exploded inside me. Maybe he sensed something too. Maybe he was waking up. Hey, he said quietly. His voice sounded tired. You okay? I almost broke down hearing concern in his voice again. Actually, no. Silence. Then Ethan sighed. Vanessa thinks you've been investigating her. My blood ran cold.
What?
She said you've been asking weird questions about her past. Of course she knew.
Of course she did.
Nothing escaped Vanessa. She's upset, Maddie. You think I'm the problem here? I think you're obsessed. That word shattered something inside me. Obsessed. Like my concern wasn't love, wasn't fear, wasn't protection. Just irrational jealousy. Exactly how Vanessa wanted him to see me. I'm trying to protect Dad.
No, Ethan snapped suddenly.
You're trying to destroy his happiness. Then he hung up. And for the first time in my life, my brother felt unreachable. 3 nights later, I made the worst mistake of my life. I decided to confront Dad directly. And Vanessa was already waiting for me. Dad invited me over Sunday afternoon. The text itself felt strange. We need to talk. No heart emoji.
No worms.
Nothing. The second I walked into the house, I knew something was wrong. Dad sat stiffly in the living room. Ethan stood near the fireplace with crossed arms. And Vanessa sat calmly beside Dad, wearing soft cream colors like she was auditioning for sainthood. Nobody smiled when I entered. Nobody hugged me. The atmosphere felt heavy.
Prepared.
Like they'd rehearsed this. Dad spoke first. Vanessa tells me you've been spreading disturbing rumors. There it was. Straight to war. I looked at Vanessa slowly. You mean investigating? Ethan scoffed immediately. Oh my God. Dad rubbed his forehead tiredly. Madison, why are you doing this? My chest tightened painfully, because he genuinely sounded disappointed in me, not suspicious of her.
Me.
I carefully placed Mark's folder onto the coffee table, because something about her doesn't add up. Vanessa inhaled sharply, like I'd slapped her. You hired someone to stalk me? Were you going to tell Dad you changed your name? Dad frowned instantly. Vanessa looked perfectly wounded. It was after an abusive marriage, she whispered. Of course.
Instant victimude.
Every single time. Ethan immediately moved protectively closer to her. She told us about that already. I froze. She what? Vanessa looked down sadly. My ex-husband controlled every aspect of my life. Changing my name helped me feel safe again. The room tilted emotionally, because technically, that explanation sounded reasonable, believable. That was her gift. She wrapped lies inside partial truths. I turned toward Dad desperately. She's manipulating you. Dad's expression hardened. Enough. No, Dad, listen to me. She lost 2 husbands, Ethan interrupted angrily. And instead of showing compassion, you're digging through her trauma, looking for dirt. My pulse spiked. She lied about the marriages. Because she was ashamed. Vanessa cried softly.
Tears.
Perfect timing. Always. Dad immediately grabbed her hand comfortingly. And suddenly, I realized I was losing.
Badly.
I opened the folder frantically. There are lawsuits, financial disputes. Previous families had concerns. Families? Vanessa whispered shakily. You contacted my former family members? Her voice cracked perfectly, like genuine betrayal. You're proving exactly why I felt unsafe around you. Unsafe. Another strategic word. Dad stood abruptly. That's enough. I stared at him. Dad, you crossed a line. Those 4 words crushed me. Because Vanessa looked victorious for half a second before masking it again.
Tiny.
But I saw it. Ethan shook his head at me in disgust. I can't believe you. You think I want this? I shouted. Yes. Ethan exploded. Because you can't stand someone else being important to Dad. The accusation hit like a slap. Vanessa started crying harder. Dad immediately wrapped an arm around her shoulders, protecting her from me. My own father was protecting her from me. I felt physically sick. She's isolating you, I whispered desperately. Can't you see what's happening? Dad's face suddenly darkened. You know what I see? Silence. I see my daughter becoming cruel and paranoid. That sentence broke something inside me.
Completely.
Because Dad wasn't just doubting me anymore. He believed her. Vanessa won. I looked at Ethan one final time, hoping, begging silently, for some sign of recognition. Some flicker of the brother who knew me better than anyone. But all I saw was anger. Cold disappointment. You need help, he said quietly. The exact same words he'd later repeat the night of my arrest. Only now, they hurt worse. Because this was the moment I truly lost my family. I left shaking so badly, I nearly crashed my car. And things somehow got even worse the very next morning. Because at 6:42 a.m., Vanessa's Mercedes was reported robbed. And by noon, everyone believed I did it. The police arrived at my apartment just after sunset. 2 squad cars. Lights flashing. Neighbors staring through blinds. The knock on my door sounded violent. Aggressive. I opened it wearing sweatpants and an old hoodie. Madison Reed? Yes. We need to ask you some questions regarding a theft investigation. My stomach dropped instantly. What theft? The older officer studied my face carefully. A break-in involving Vanessa Whitmore's vehicle. Of course. Of course. I actually laughed from disbelief. You're kidding. Neither officer reacted. That's when fear truly hit me. This wasn't gossip anymore. This was escalation. Real escalation. Can we come inside? I let them in numbly, while my brain raced. Vanessa did this. She finally made her move. The officers questioned me for nearly 20 minutes. Where were you yesterday? Did you threaten Vanessa recently? Did you enter Daniel Reed's property? Every question already assumed guilt. And somehow, they knew intimate details about our family conflict, meaning Vanessa had been building a narrative against me for weeks, maybe months. The older officer finally sighed. Miss Reed, we have reason to believe stolen property may be inside your vehicle. Ice flooded my chest.
No.
We need consent to search the car.
No. Y rapata instantly.
Get a warrant. The younger officer exchanged a glance with his partner. And that's when I knew. They already had won. The entire neighborhood watched. That was the worst part. People pretending to casually check mail. Curtains twitching. Phones recording. Humiliation spreading in real time. I stood barefoot on the curb while officers searched my trunk. Then suddenly, one of them froze. My heart stopped. No, I whispered immediately. He slowly pulled out a black velvet bag. Vanessa's jewelry. Exactly where she wanted it found. I physically stumbled backward. That's impossible. The officer's face hardened instantly. Miss Reed, she planted that. The words sounded pathetic even to me. Desperate. Crazy.
Perfect.
And then, Dad's black SUV pulled onto the street, followed by Ethan's truck. Vanessa sat in the passenger seat, wearing sunglasses despite the evening darkness. The second she stepped out, she started crying. Performance mode activated instantly. Dad looked devastated. Ethan looked furious. And suddenly, I understood. This wasn't just about framing me legally. Vanessa wanted emotional annihilation.
Total destruction.
She wanted my family to watch me collapse. The officers displayed the recovered jewelry. Vanessa gasped dramatically. That's my grandmother's bracelet. Liar. Ethan turned toward me slowly. His expression genuinely horrified me. Because he believed this. Why would you do this? He asked quietly. I didn't. Stop lying. The rage in his voice echoed down the street. Neighbors openly stared now. Dad looked like he might cry. I don't understand, he whispered. That hurt worse than Ethan yelling. Because Dad sounded broken. And Vanessa? Vanessa moved closer to him protectively. Like SHE was comforting him. I didn't want this, she whispered tearfully. I told police maybe there was another explanation. I almost screamed. Everything about her was fake. Everything. But she performed vulnerability so perfectly that truth sounded insane beside her. The older officer approached carefully. Miss Reed, turn around, please. My chest tightened violently. Handcuffs. This was really happening.
I'm innocent.
No one answered. Metal clicked around my wrists. Neighbors whispered. Phones recorded. And Ethan.
God.
Ethan looked at me like I disgusted him. You need serious help, he said coldly. Then came the final knife. You're not my sister anymore. Silence. Complete silence. Even the officers looked uncomfortable. I stared at him in shock. Because no matter how bad things got, I never thought Ethan could say something like that to me. Vanessa lowered her face against his shoulder, pretending to cry. But right before officers pushed me into the squad car, she looked up and smiled.
Tiny.
Satisfied. Victorious. That smile haunted me the entire night inside county jail, because it confirmed the horrifying truth. Vanessa didn't just want control of the family. She wanted me erased completely. And somehow, she was succeeding. My name is Madison Harper. And after getting arrested in front of my father's house, I became the villain of my own family overnight. Not publicly, Not officially, but emotionally? Absolutely. The worst part wasn't the handcuffs. It wasn't even spending the night in county holding while strangers stared at me like I was trash. The worst part was waking up the next morning and realizing nobody had tried to bail me out. Not my father. Not Ethan. Nobody. I sat on the cold metal bench in that holding cell replaying Ethan's face in my head over and over again. The disgust in his eyes. The way he looked at me like I was dangerous. Like I was unstable. Like I wasn't his sister anymore. And every single time I replayed it, it hurt worse. By noon the next day, my lawyer managed to get me released temporarily while the investigation continued. Her name was Denise Parker, mid-40s, sharp eyes, no-nonsense voice, the kind of attorney who didn't waste sympathy unless she meant it. And even she looked worried after reviewing the police report. "This doesn't look good, Madison." That sentence nearly broke me. Because if even my lawyer sounded unsure, what chance did I have? The stolen jewelry from Vanessa's robbery had been found neatly wrapped inside a duffel bag in my trunk. Not hidden poorly, not tossed around randomly, placed carefully, almost professionally. Like someone wanted police to find it immediately. Vanessa had thought of everything. And the scariest part? It was working. Outside the station, reporters weren't waiting yet, but neighbors had already started talking. By evening, social media had done what social media always does. Destroyed nuance. A blurry photo of me in handcuffs started circulating online. People I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly became experts on my mental health. Honestly, she always seemed jealous of her dad's new wife. She gives unstable energy. Family jealousy makes people crazy. I stopped reading after that. But it didn't matter. The damage was already done. 2 days later, I got placed on temporary leave from the architecture firm where I worked. Not fired. Pending investigation.
But everyone knew what that meant.
My boss couldn't even look me in the eye during the meeting. "We just need some distance until things become clearer." Distance. That word again. Everyone wanted distance from me now. Meanwhile, calling him strong. Calling Vanessa brave. I stared at that post until my vision blurred. Then finally threw my phone across the apartment. It slammed into the wall and shattered. Just like everything else in my life. A week later, I started questioning myself. That's the terrifying thing about manipulation. Eventually, you start wondering if maybe you really are the problem. I barely slept, barely ate. I stopped answering calls from friends because I couldn't handle hearing pity in their voices. And the silence inside my apartment became unbearable. Every room felt haunted by the life I used to have. One night around 2 a.m., I found myself sitting on my kitchen floor crying over something stupid. Frozen pizza. Because Friday nights used to mean movie nights with Ethan. And now he probably hated me. That realization shattered something inside me. I cover my mouth trying not to sob too loudly. I had never felt that alone in my life. Then things somehow got worse. Because Denise called me the next morning sounding tense. "Madison, we found unusual financial activity involving your father's business accounts." I sat upright immediately. What kind of activity? Large transfers. Offshore movement. Multiple shell LLCs. Cold fear spread through my chest. Vanessa? We don't know yet, but the timing is suspicious. Suddenly, everything clicked. The inheritance, the marriage, the isolation, the robbery setup. This was bigger than family manipulation. Much bigger. And then Denise said something that made my stomach drop completely. "Madison, I think Vanessa may be preparing to disappear." Silence filled the room. Disappear. With my father's money. With his life destroyed.
With my family shattered.
I felt sick. Then later that night, I got a text from an unknown number. One sentence. That was it. She did the same thing to my family. I stared at the message for nearly 5 minutes before responding. Who is this? 3 dots appeared immediately. Then, "My name is Rachel Bennett. We need to meet before Vanessa destroys your father too." My pulse started pounding.
2.
That word mattered. Two meant there were others. Two meant this wasn't the first time. We agreed to meet the next afternoon at a small coffee shop outside downtown Seattle. I almost didn't go. Part of me thought it could be another trap, another setup, another humiliation waiting for me. But desperation overpowered fear, because, at that point, I had nothing left to lose. Rachel looked exhausted when she walked in. Mid-30s.
Pale skin.
Dark circles under her eyes. The kind of exhaustion that looked permanent. She sat across from me and stared quietly for a second before speaking. You look exactly how my brother looked. A chill went through me. What happened to your family? Rachel gave a bitter laugh. Vanessa happened. Except apparently, her name hadn't been Vanessa then. It had been Victoria. Before that, Natalie. Before that,
Claire.
different names, different cities, different wealthy men. Same pattern every time. Rachel pulled out a thick folder from her bag. Inside were photos, marriage licenses, business records, newspaper clippings. I felt physically sick flipping through them. She targets emotionally vulnerable men, Rachel explained quietly. Usually widowers, divorced fathers, men with money and guilt. That was my father, exactly. After the divorce, Dad blamed himself for everything. Vanessa had exploited that weakness perfectly. She isolates them slowly, Rachel continued. Then she starts moving money. My hands shook turning another page. She did this to your father too? Rachel nodded slowly. My stepfather died 6 months after marrying her. I froze.
What?
They ruled it an overdose. The air left my lungs. Rachel leaned closer. But he never touched drugs a single day in his life. Silence swallowed the table. I suddenly understood why Rachel looked terrified all the time. Because this wasn't just manipulation anymore. This might actually be dangerous. Then Rachel pulled out her phone. I need you to hear something. She pressed play. Vanessa's voice filled the speaker. Cold.
Calm.
Unrecognizable. These men are easiest when they're emotionally dependent. Once the children are isolated, the assets become simple. I stopped breathing. The recording continued. Another female voice laughed. Then Vanessa again. You'd be surprised how quickly families destroy themselves if you push the right insecurities. I felt nauseous. That voice. It sounded nothing like the warm, elegant woman my father defended. This voice sounded empty.
Predatory.
Rachel stopped the recording. She didn't know my brother was recording their conversation. My head spun. Then Rachel delivered the sentence that changed everything. She has hidden cameras inside your father's house. What? She records conversations. That's how she stays ahead of everyone. Suddenly, every fight made sense. Every accusation. Every perfectly timed manipulation. She always knew things she shouldn't have known. Because she was listening, watching, planning. Rachel reached across the table, gripping my hand tightly. You need to understand something, Madison. Her eyes filled with tears. Women like her don't stop willingly. Fear crawled up my spine. What is she planning? Rachel hesitated, then finally whispered. She empties accounts right before major public events. My blood ran cold. The wedding. Rachel nodded. She's preparing to disappear after the wedding. The rehearsal dinner looked beautiful. That was the sickest part. Golden lights hung from the ceiling of the waterfront ballroom. Soft piano music played near the stage. Champagne glasses sparkled under candlelight. And every single person there believed Vanessa was the victim. I stood outside the venue shaking. Rachel's recordings sat inside my purse, along with financial records Denise had uncovered earlier that week. We finally had enough proof. But proving something, and surviving long enough for people to believe it, were two different things. I shouldn't have gone. Honestly, part of me knew this could end horribly, but another part of me couldn't walk away. Because if I did, Vanessa would win forever. The moment I stepped inside the ballroom, I saw Ethan, and the look on his face nearly stopped me cold.
Pure rage.
Like my existence embarrassed him. Why are you here? He snapped immediately. Conversations around us started quieting. Vanessa turned slowly from across the room and smiled. Not nervous, not surprised. Smiled because she thought she'd already won. I just need 5 minutes, I said carefully. You've done enough, Ethan hissed. Dad looked exhausted sitting near the center table. Older somehow.
Drained.
Vanessa moved beside him instantly, placing a hand on his chest protectively. Richard, she whispered softly. Maybe she's having another episode. Like I was mentally unstable. The room started watching openly now. Whispers spreading everywhere. My heartbeat pounded violently. But I forced myself forward. You installed hidden cameras inside Dad's house. The room went dead silent. Vanessa blinked once, then laughed softly. Oh, Madison. That fake pitying tone made my skin crawl. You need help. Ethan stepped between us immediately.
Leave.
Right now. I pulled out the recordings. She's been stealing money. Vanessa's expression changed for half a second. Tiny, almost invisible. But I saw it.
Panic.
Finally, Dad slowly stood up. Confusion spreading across his face. What is she talking about? Vanessa grabbed his arm quickly. She's spiraling again. Then suddenly Ethan grabbed the envelope from my hands. Papers scattered everywhere across the ballroom floor. Financial statements. Photos. Fake identities. Rachel's documents. Gasps erupted around the room. And that's when everything exploded.
Dad started breathing heavily.
One hand pressed against his chest.
Dad.
Ethan turned instantly. Chaos erupted around us. People shouting. Vanessa screaming dramatically. Someone calling 911. Then suddenly, the ballroom projector turned on. Everyone froze. Static flickered across the giant screen. Then security footage appeared. And the entire room went silent. Because on that screen, Vanessa was clearly visible placing stolen jewelry into my trunk. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The ballroom felt frozen in time. Vanessa's face drained of color instantly as the footage replayed again on the massive screen.
Clear as day.
Her car, my trunk, the jewelry, her planting everything herself. A woman near the back whispered, "Oh my God." Then suddenly the entire room erupted.
People shouting.
Chairs scraping. Someone cursed loudly. Dad looked like he might collapse. Ethan stared at the screen in complete horror, like his brain physically couldn't process what he was seeing. And Vanessa? For the first time since entering our lives, she completely lost control.
No.
Her voice cracked violently. This isn't. But nobody was listening anymore. Because years of manipulation had shattered in less than 30 seconds. I watched Ethan slowly turn toward her. His face looked destroyed. You framed her? Vanessa immediately switched tactics.
Tears. Panic.
Victim mode. She drove me to it. The room gasped. Vanessa pointed at me, shaking hysterically. She wanted to ruin us. She wouldn't leave us alone. Then Rachel stepped forward from the crowd. And Vanessa froze completely. True fear entered her eyes for the first time. Rachel's voice came out ice cold. You said the exact same thing before my stepfather died. Dead silence. Dad looked between them, both trembling. What is she talking about? Rachel handed Ethan the recordings. His hands shook, pressing play. Vanessa's cold voice echoed through the ballroom speakers again. These men are easiest when they're emotionally dependent. The room erupted again. Dad physically staggered backward. Ethan looked nauseous. Then Denise arrived with detectives. And suddenly Vanessa realized this wasn't a social situation anymore. This was criminal. The lead detective stepped forward calmly. Natalie Chambers. Vanessa closed her eyes immediately.
Got you.
You're under arrest for fraud, evidence tampering, grand theft, and conspiracy. The fake identity hit the room like a bomb. Dad whispered weakly. Natalie? Vanessa looked around wildly, like an animal trapped in a burning building. Then finally, the mask disappeared completely.
No fake dares. No worms. No charm.
Just rage.
Pure aglirage.
You pathetic weak people, she snapped viciously. Several guests gasped. Vanessa pointed directly at Dad. You were lonely and stupid. That's why this worked. Dad looked physically shattered. Then she turned toward Ethan. And you. Her lip curled in disgust. You were embarrassingly easy to manipulate. Ethan looked like he'd been punched. Then, finally, she looked at me. Real hatred filled her eyes. You ruined everything. I stared back at her calmly.
No.
I said quietly. You did. Police pulled her toward the exit while guests watched in complete shock. And for the first time in months, the room finally saw the real monster. Not me. Her. Outside the ballroom, I found Ethan sitting alone on the curb in the rain. Completely broken. His face buried in his hands. The same brother who once protected me from everything looked destroyed. I called you crazy, he whispered without looking up. Rain soaked both of us silently. I chose her over you. I didn't say anything, because, honestly, there were no words big enough for what happened between us. Then Ethan finally looked at me and broke down sobbing. 8 months later, the house felt warm again. Not perfect. Never perfect.
But warm.
Friday night movie nights slowly came back first. Awkward at the beginning. Quiet. Careful. Like we were all afraid one wrong sentence might break everything again. Dad changed the most. Vanessa had drained nearly $2 million from his accounts before getting caught. But the financial damage wasn't what haunted him most. It was the guilt. Some nights I'd catch him staring silently out the kitchen window for long stretches. Like he still couldn't believe how badly he failed us. Therapy helped. For all of us. Especially Ethan. Because the shame nearly destroyed him after the truth came out. People online turned on Vanessa instantly once the arrest footage leaked. But they turned on Ethan too, calling him weak, stupid, spineless. They didn't understand what manipulation actually does to someone slowly over time. I did. That's why I never hated him completely, even when I wanted to. One night after movie night ended, Ethan stayed behind while Dad went upstairs. The living room became quiet except for the TV menu music still playing softly. Ethan stared down at his hands for a long moment, then finally said, I still don't understand how you forgave me. Emotion tightened in my chest instantly. Because, truthfully, some parts of me still hurt deeply. Some parts probably always would. I looked at him quietly. You were manipulated, I said softly. I still abandoned you. Tears filled his eyes immediately. That text from the police station. His voice cracked. I replay it in my head constantly.
So did I.
More than he knew. Then Ethan whispered something that nearly broke me completely. I became the person we used to protect each other from. Silence filled the room. Then I moved beside him quietly. You came back. He looked at me stunned. And that matters. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then suddenly Ethan laughed weakly through tears. You know what's weird? What? I still expect to hear you yelling at horror movies during movie night. I smiled for the first time that entire day. You still scream during jump scares. That happened one time. It happened tonight. He shook his head, laughing softly. And for the first time in nearly a year, it felt like my brother was really back. Later that night, after everyone went upstairs, I was half asleep on the couch when I heard soft footsteps outside the living room. Then Ethan's voice quietly whispered from the hallway. You awake, Maddie? The exact same words he used to whisper when we were kids after nightmares. Emotion hit me so hard I almost cried instantly. I stared toward the dark hallway, then answered softly, always. And, in that moment, after betrayal, lies, arrests, manipulation, heartbreak, and everything we survived, I realized something important. Real love never isolates you from the people who truly care about you. Real love protects connection, not control. And sometimes, the people worth fighting for are the ones too lost to realize they need saving. So tell me honestly, could you forgive someone who chose the wrong person over you? Or would the betrayal be too deep to repair?